So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at how Dickens presents the character of Jacob Marley in this stave. Some of the vocabulary that you'll come across in this section includes incredulous, which means unwilling or unable to believe something, caustic, which is sarcastic or scolding, waggish, which is humorous in a playful way, spectre, which means a ghost, infernal, relating to hell or the underworld, apparition, which is a ghost or ghost-like, fettered, held back by chains, lingered, to stay in a place longer than necessary, deuce, used in anger to express surprise, remorse, deep regret or guilt, eternal, to last forever, and immortal, which means to live forever. In order to understand this section of the novella, it's important to understand some of the beliefs with heaven, hell and purgatory. So the Victorians had a fascination with the supernatural and life after death. Many followed the belief that once you die, you would face a day of judgment where you're either banished to hell, where you'll be condemned to suffer pain for eternity, or you will be rewarded by being sent to heaven to live with God. Straight after death, there is a state of purgatory. This is a place where some people who have sinned are purified in a cleansing fire, after which they are accepted into heaven. In this section, there is a suggestion that Marley is currently in a state of purgatory, where he's wandering the earth in order to repent for the sin of greed that he has committed. So reading through the first section. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His colour changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leapt up, as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling, like his pigtail, and his coat skirts and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped around his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the two buttons on the coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked the phantom through and through, and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous, and fought against his senses. "How now," said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much," Marley's voice, no doubt about it. So with the arrival of Marley's ghost, Dickens continually still makes symbolic references to images or fire or light. In the line, the dying flame leapt up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. We have Dickens using personification of the fire, so that the fire reflects Scrooge's fear. The image of the fire can also be associated with the fire of hell, which is why the fire is claiming that it knows Marley's ghost. The chain that is described is hung with items that represent his old life, keys and cash boxes, all of which represent money, and how, like Scrooge, he was reluctant to share the money that he had. However, these objects now weigh him down and force him into his current life of purgatory, where he is forced to repent this sin of greed. The reference to Marley not having any bowels is meant as a humorous pun. It has a double meaning. In the literal sense, as he is transparent and therefore has no inner organs, but this is also an expression which suggests he is cold and heartless, something that Scrooge is perhaps now coming to also realise. The reference to him being a phantom suggests that he is being seen as evil by Scrooge. The pronoun it, which is represented by how Marley is not a human, but something else altogether. His death-cold eyes is a compound adjective which represents just how lifeless Marley is. He doesn't feel happiness, as if he were in heaven. He doesn't feel pain as if he was in hell, but rather he feels nothing as he is in purgatory. Reading the next section. Who are you? Ask me who I was. Who were you then? Said Scrooge, raising his voice. You're particular for a shade. He was going to say to a shade, but substituted this as more appropriate. In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down? Asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. I can. Do it then. Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that, in the event of its being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. You don't believe in me, observed the ghost. I don't, said Scrooge. What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses? I don't know, said Scrooge. Why do you doubt your senses? Because, said Scrooge, a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of a gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. By Scrooge instructing Marley to sit down in this section, it suggests that Scrooge doesn't really understand the gravity of what is happening. He is desperately trying to exert control over the situation and over Marley's ghost in order to keep his feeling of authority. Later, Marley says, "Why do you doubt your senses?" which may show the first signs of Scrooge doubting himself, as he wonders if he is imagining it, which could foreshadow how Scrooge may doubt his beliefs and opinions in the future. However, he then quickly tries to rationalise the sight he is seeing by blaming it on a digestive complaint. In the Victorian times, they believed that indigestion could cause nightmares. He is trying to maintain and keep authority over the ghost by trying not to be scared of him. Scrooge tries to hide his fear further by making a joke. The pun, "There's more of a gravy than grave about you," suggests that he is viewing him more like the food gravy than being grave as in serious or dead. The last line suggests that Marley's voice was so chilling it was enough to penetrate through Scrooge's bones. To sit staring at those thick glazed eyes in silence for a moment would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. There was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but this was clearly the case, for though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated as by the hot vapour from an oven. You see this toothpick, said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge, for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though only for a second, to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself. I do, replied the ghost. You are not looking at it, said Scrooge. But I see it, said the ghost, notwithstanding. Well, returned Scrooge, I have but to swallow this, and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug. At this the spirit raised a frightful cry, and shook its chains with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was its horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. Mercy, he said, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? So in this section, Scrooge feels that looking at the spectre's eyes would be a torment and probably cause some terrible and permanent damage. Scrooge holding tightly to his chair shows his fear, as it suggests that he's holding on for his life. This is one of the first times that Scrooge is being presented as vulnerable. Man of the worldly mind, replied the ghost, do you believe in me or not? I do, said Scrooge, I must, but why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me? It is required of every man, the ghost returned, that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide, and if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world, oh woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness. Again the spectre raised a cry and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands. You are fettered, said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me why. I wear the chain I forged in life, replied the ghost. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Scrooge trembled more and more. Or would you know, pursued the ghost, the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full and heavy as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have laboured on it since. It is a ponderous chain. Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. Jacob, he said imploringly, old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob. I have none to give, the ghost replied. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting-house, mark me. In life my spirits never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. So in this section, Marley's explaining to Scrooge how he's trapped in purgatory. He's repenting the fact that he now cannot join in with the happiness that others experience. The word might suggests he should have shared his happiness when he had a chance to do so. He is warning Scrooge that he too will be condemned to an eternal punishment in the afterlife. Each link of the chain is a result of the actions Marley has undergone in life, and as a result of this he has to carry around the weight of his selfishness and greed through him for eternity. The reference to free will links to religious context that God gave us free will to learn from our mistakes. Therefore, it is his own fault that he is experiencing this torment. Jacob then alludes to the fact that Scrooge has been working on an even longer afterlife chain than one he currently carries. He says that Scrooge's chain was the same size as his 7 years ago, so now it must be even longer. Scrooge asks Marley to speak comfort to him, which suggests he is beginning to realise the severity of the situation. He sees what Marley's purgatory situation is like, and this scares him. Perhaps calling Marley by his first name, Scrooge wanted to channel the friendship they once had, and by doing so, he wanted to decrease his inevitable punishment. It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting up his eyes or getting off his knees. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob, Scrooge observed in a businesslike manner, though with humility and deference. Slow? The ghost repeated. 7 years dead, mused Scrooge, and travelling all the time. The whole time, said the ghost. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse. You travel fast? Said Scrooge. On the wings of the wind, replied the ghost. You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years, said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry, and clanking its chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for a nuisance. "O captive, bound and double-ironed," cried the phantom, "not to know that ages of incessant labour by immortal creatures, for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it's susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunity misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I." "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. "Business!" cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. So this section is conveying to the reader that the earth will come to an end before all is good in the world. Dickens is talking directly to the audience about the need for social reform and to stop people from experiencing extreme poverty. Marley is regretting the fact that he didn't do anything to help others in his life. The quote, "Mankind was my business," betrays that Marley had a responsibility to take care of others. This implies that he is desperately filled with remorse. He is racked with regret. This also reflects Dickens's view of social responsibility and how everyone should take care of each other rather than only focusing on making a profit for themselves.